Forgive yourself because you're going to make mistakes. Forgive the person that wronged you. Because right now, there's someone's telling a story about you that you are the evil person. The big guy upstairs, he's my boss. There's a plan that we have no idea. So the best thing to do is, be present in the moment, figure out why it's happened if you can. There's root causes. Sometimes you're not going to figure it out. And sometimes you can't fix it, but, adapt and survive.
Well, welcome to episode 20 of the Engineered Success Podcast, where we sit down with business leaders, entrepreneurs, and people just like you and me who are on their journey to understanding what success means for them. I'm excited to have Brent in the podcast studio today, where we're going to be diving into his journey, his past, and some exciting experiences that he's had leading him to where he is today. So thank you, Brent, so much for joining us today.
Well, welcome. Thank you and for inviting me.
Yeah.
Glad to be here, Stephen.
No, this is going to be great. So as you know, and we've talked about a little bit prior to jumping in and hitting record here, is that we spend some time just thinking about the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
The past of kind of where we've come from and what's gotten us to where we are. And some of the, things that are exciting and then maybe some of the challenges that have happened over the years. So can you take us back to, the space and the place where you were born and raised? And that'll add some context to the rest of the story.
Oh, sure. I'm a Michigander. I grew up in Jackson, Michigan, and we grew up in an area. I had four brothers, and we're Roman Catholics. We grew up across the street from the Catholic Church, and there's a Catholic grade school, Queen of Miraculous Medal. The nuns' convent was, a block down one side, and then the rectory, the priest rectory, was 2 blocks the other way. So quite honestly, we went to school with nuns, and they were Polish Catholics, German Catholics, Irish Catholics. And so, it was a very different time. I was born in 1959, so it was the 60s era. And, our life was ruled, was guided by, I should say, of course, the Catholic Church, and our faith was very strong. But the church bells, because as kids, after school, you got your chores done and homework done, you went outside or else you'd get some more chores, right? So you went outside, and then when the bells started ringing, you counted them to know when you had to be home for dinner, and it was just a herd of kids, we were just, it was a beautiful time in our lives. But at the same time, I had 2 older brothers, and I remember my older brother sitting with my dad intently staring at the TV, and numbers are scrolling by, and it were draft numbers for the Vietnam War. And it's like, that in contrast to watching Neil Armstrong and the astronauts walk on the moon, and then literally I remember practice drills of getting underneath your desk in case there was a nuclear bomb. So it was an interesting contrasting time in my life growing up in that area. But it was founded on, real values. I'm not here to preach anybody on their faith, but it was, if you did something wrong in the neighborhood, your neighbor's mom would smack you, and then she'd yell over the fence and tell your mom, and you'd come home and she'd say, "What did you do?" And then you'd get disciplined by your mom.
We already know.
Yeah, and it would continue on, So it was, you've heard that, it takes a village, right? And we were very fortunate to be raised in that kind of environment. Going back one step further, both my parents were born in Poland. Working class blue collar people, policemen, blue collar workers, automotive workers, tool and die kind of people. And my dad's dad was born and raised in Poland, and my dad's mom was born and raised in Poland. Same thing on my mother's side. And so when my dad was, I don't know how old he must have been. He must, have been in 15, 16, 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there. And his dad wanted him to go to work. And his dad, my Jaja, they would call him, my dad's dad would say, he would say, "So do you know your numbers?" And my father said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, do you know your letters?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, can you read?" And he goes, "Yeah." And my grandfather said, "Well, you're going to work." And my dad said, "No, I want to finish high school."
Okay.
And so my grandmother, campaigned, advocated so my father could finish high school. Then along comes World War II, and, he signed up early and he served in World War II. So it was that kind of working class mentality, you worked and, your word was your bond, no axe never quit. Yeah. That kind of mentality guided me the whole time. There's a real story as I was reflecting on, having this podcast with you, is that, I was I ended up going to a public school in junior high, and these kids started coming out and they had corduroys. And what was novel at that time, which is probably hilarious to all these young entrepreneurs and engineers out there now, is they had blue corduroys and red corduroys. And I remember, some of the kids had these brand new colorful corduroys. I came home and I told my mom, I said, Mother, I really want some blue corduroys. And she goes, blue corduroys? She goes, that's going to cost money. We don't have money. And I said, what am I going to do? And she said, well, get a job. How old was I? 12, 13, 14. I said, how am I going to get a job? And she said, figure it out. And that phrase right there ruled my whole life. It's always been that, if I was curious, I had to figure it out. If I had a problem, I had to figure it out, which, led into another story where I went and got my first lawn mowing job. And I had to borrow the neighbor's lawnmower. And so the lawn to mow was an elderly lady. She was a widow, and she lived on the other side of the playground. So I pushed the mower across the playground, and I, knocked on the door. And I don't remember her name, but I said, I'm here to mow your lawn. She said, okay. And I think it was $5. It was a huge amount of money, right? And so I mowed her front lawn, which there was very small front lawn, very small back lawn. And I knocked on the door and I said, I'm done. And she looks and she goes, no, you didn't sweep the sidewalk. And I said, I don't have a broom. She goes, I'll loan you my broom. So I swept her sidewalk, knocked on the door again. And she goes, oh, you didn't edge. I go, edge? You didn't say to edge. I said, I'm mowing. She goes, no, you got to edge. So they edged the lawn. And so finally, after going through that whole trial and tribulation with her, I was like, oh my God. So she paid me, and I went back and I took the lawnmower back to my neighbor. And I still remember this day. He goes, okay. He goes, well, you owe me for the gas. I'm like, oh my God, I got to pay him. And then he goes, oh, not you owe me for renting it. I go, I'm renting it. He goes, well, there's wear and tear on it. And I went home, like with $250 or whatever it was. And I'll never forget that as well about contract law is what it comes down to, setting expectations. That was very formative in my life, and I carried it with me the whole time. So
I love both of that stories, and just reflecting a little bit on the story that you talked about with your mother, and you went to her and she said, you'll figure it out, or go figure it out. I think is what she said. And I think I jumped to you'll figure it out, because I think that maybe instilled something in your mind going forward that was like, hey, I can figure this out. I will figure this out. And that mentality, which maybe we'll talk a little bit more about as we get more into your story. But I feel like, so I have two kids, one that's 7 and one that's 3. And I'll tell you that my first tendency when they come and ask me for something is not go figure it out. It's not to say that, but probably doing them a little bit of a disservice by just like showing them the answer, or helping them find the answer, or pointing them in the right direction, because sometimes it's really the skill that they need is that they understand then that they can figure it out, and how to figure it out. And then on the example regarding mowing the lawn, I love that, because so you really understood not just, hey, this is my revenue that I make, from mowing the lawn, but this is what net profits really look like after expenses, right? And you learned that early on.
Yeah, that's not the terminology I had. It was more like criminal. Where do I go to get my rest of my money back?
Who took my money? So then did you go back and mow their lawn again ever, or that was a one-time
That was a one-time deal. I ended up getting a paper route, which was very successful. It was 100 papers, and that was a great experience as well. But
was this a little bit, so you were about 12, 13 during this time, or?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit older when I had the paper route. Goodness, it was moved to a different part of town. There was, I picked up the paper route, and my best friend had the one right next to it. So it was a wonderful experience. That was very useful.
Now, you mentioned being Michigander. Was that here in West Michigan or
Jackson?
Okay, so not far either.
No, not at all. Yeah.
And then paper route, still kind of in your middle school, getting into kind of high school age. And, at that phase, were you into sports or into anything specific as far as different skills that you were learning? Obviously you're working hard, right? And you were learning that from your parents and your grandparents of, hey, we put in the work to earn things. We don't just get things.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It was a good statement. It's a good summary of that. Yeah. Well, so I was... Again, this is crazy for many, probably your audience, but they started building malls. And we moved out to the country, and then we went moving back into the city, and they were building their first mall in Jackson. And I remember my mom going, you're not going to sit on the sofa. and you're not going to go hang out in the mall. All there is trouble in the mall.
Mm.
What are you going to do in the mall? You don't have any money anyways. So I got into playing ice hockey, and our family, we belonged to a club where, and during the summertime, we would race sailboats. The hockey, I learned a lot about starting late in that sport, and how to overcome, you know, being the worst person on the team.
Mm.
Yeah, and struggling with that. But then I learned a lot about being a team player. That was the most amazing thing. You realize, there's a goalie, there's wings, there's defenseman, offenseman, there's strategy, there's plays, skill levels, and so that was a great experience in itself. And I still play ice hockey today. Yeah. hmm Yeah.
Nice. So you're starting to understand not only hard work, but also, what it means to be part of a team and that everyone plays an important role into achieving a certain outcome.
hmm
And
Yep. Yep.
also how to stay out of malls, right? Which probably
Abs-
was good advice. So it sounds like your mother's just full of good advice. So that's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Well, anyways, we won't go there. But in sailing as well, you have two people on a boat. You have to be a teammate. One's the skipper, one's the crew. A lot of good learnings in that way.
Mm.
There's in today's world, and you're a parent now. You'll probably experience some of this. Kids in video games,
Mm.
right? Do they get an iPad? Do they, how much computer time, how much TV time they get? Um, so there's learning in both, and there's value in all of that. Whether you're playing the game online with people around the world. So I don't want to disparage that. I've got a son who plays video games still, and he's got friends in Norway and New Jersey and Florida. I mean, it's a great world. But the reason I'm coming back to that is staying physically active. One of the things that I speak and continually work on continuously is being active, playing sports, continuing sailing, going to the gym 3 days a week. Health, as you know, is something you don't want to lose. You're young. You think that you're going to live forever. I mean, I was listening to a podcast, actually. I think it was The Hidden Mind. You ever hear Hidden Mind? I think it was on NPR show. Anyways, they talk about the younger you are, you don't realize, life is short and how quickly it comes by. And once you lose your health, it's very difficult to get back. So that's one of the things I just want to highlight as part of. I was very fortunate. I continued to be very active throughout my life and playing soccer, sports, and everything like that, maintaining my health.
Yeah, I love that and making that a priority.
Yeah.
It's recently come to life light of kind of looking back. So I started making YouTube videos 7, 8 years ago, and just kind of vlog. So I was like running a business, right? Kind of pushing myself, and I would get on there like sleep less, work harder, just all this stuff. And I, worked really hard, right? And which is, I don't think there's anything wrong with hard work, but also sleep super important. And I just look back and it's like, wow, I didn't even look like healthy, right? I didn't even look, I just looked exhausted. I looked tired. And at the time I didn't even think about it.
Right.
But then you get to a point where you start to, be more active, or you start to put your health first, or you start to feel good. And then you're like, oh wait, this is what feeling good feels like. Man, I was really missing out when I didn't get good sleep, when I didn't exercise, when I didn't eat right and things like that. And then when I fall back into some of those habits of, staying up late, or, not doing the things that I should be doing, eating or drinking with health, then I start feeling that way again. It's like, no, I know what good health feels like, and I want to get back to that. So, it's like, it is super important. But it's also important to set up your lifestyle, in a way that it promotes you to get good sleep and to put that first.
And that's not easy. I mean, especially when you're young and you're in a career. I mean, we were talking earlier about, you're a mechanical engineer, you started your first company, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Younger, when my era, if you want to call it that, I mean, we still tried to work for one company and maybe move to 2 or 3 companies, but the point was still, hey, I'm going to climb the corporate ladder. I was driven, I'm going to get where I want to get. And many of us, early in our careers, we use a lot of that energy to be successful at that time, what we deemed to be successful, right?
Yep, definitely. And
Mhm.
so you're playing hockey,
Yep.
you're staying active,
Mhm.
you're working your way onto the team, but trying to understand, hey, how do I go from maybe not the best person on the team to being part of a team that can win games or
Yep.
whatever.
Yep.
And so you're learning that skill, you're getting into college age. What are you looking for as you're looking to make that decision of what career path do you want to go on to, or what do you want to learn?
Yeah, it's so funny. I mean, you say that because I was trying to think about that. I remember, and I was in high school. I told my mom and dad, I go, I don't know what I want to do, where I want to go. I'm going to graduate soon, and they just said, you're good at math and science. You should be
Right.
an engineer. I said, okay. I mean, that's all thought I put
Mm,
into it. So I went off to college to be an engineer, and not even sure what that was, what you did as an engineer.
mm,
Except I did have to say that I knew I liked to make things. I still have a sketch of my first patent, first idea that I wanted to get patent. I saved a bunch of stuff when I was a kid, and my wife found it, and she framed it and she put it up on the wall for me. It was really interesting. But yeah, so that was how I chose my career, quite honestly.
mm. Your parents noticed something in you that you had a skill that maybe, you just hadn't pinpointed, but you enjoyed potentially. And they said, hey, maybe this is the right path for you. So you jumped on engineering and you got into those first classes. Where did you end up going to
So
school?
I went to Michigan Technological
Okay.
University for my first 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as you got into it and understood more about engineering, did you agree with that path, or did you feel like, oh, shoot, what did I get myself into?
Well, that's a great question. The The interesting thing was all the way through high school, grade school, high school, junior high, I didn't study much. I
Okay.
just kind of got good grades, right?
Yeah.
So, the first challenge I had, and maybe some people out there has experienced as well, you had to develop study habits. So, I got into it, and I did enjoy it. I did well, I did relatively well at Michigan Tech. And I remember coming home on probably was my sophomore year, junior, no, yeah, sophomore year. It was Christmas, and I told my dad, I said, this is killing me. I'm just grinding, and it's not fun. You know, you're going through the math, the physics, chemistry, the calculus, differential equations. I'm like, when are we going to do something? So my dad, in all his wisdom, I still remember, we drove down to the Ace Hardware store, and we bought a bunch of different kind of wood and some dowels. And, over that Christmas break, my dad and I made a wooden cutting board. And I just had so much joy in making that. I was like, this is phenomenal. I just love it. And I went back to school and was reinvigorated.
Mm.
So again, what I want to highlight is there was somebody in my life, fortunately my father was aware, and took the time to say, okay, I think I know what this kid needs. He needs to, he kind of given me that guidance, and it put me back on that track. And then, after, from you're an engineer, you get it after your sophomore year, start getting to some more fun classes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, make you think a little bit more and a little bit more hands-on and a
Yep.
little bit more of experiencing what the cutting board process was for you, right?
Yeah.
Seeing something to completion, not just writing something on a piece of paper, right?
Well, the labs, the labs were
Yeah.
phenomenal. And, I'm part of my career, I was at GVSU, and, the hands-on experience, the co-op experience, et cetera. There's nothing better, I think, that
Mm.
really turns you into a good engineer.
So you mentioned the first couple years you were at Michigan Tech.
Yep.
And was that what type of engineering?
Mechanical.
Mechanical engineering.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And then after Michigan Tech, where did you head?
Well, then my dad got transferred to Illinois, and I lost my in-state residency, so I had to transfer to University of Illinois Urbana. So I finished my undergraduate degree there.
Okay.
Yeah. And, you know, uh, phenomenal school, but huge, right? Major tier one research university. The I guess they would call it the College of Engineering, was the same size, student population wise, as at that time, as the whole University of Michigan Technological University. I mean, so when I went down there, it was Michigan Tech was a smaller school,
Yeah.
great school. I one of the best experiences of my life. Don't get me wrong, but then I went into this big, huge, lecture rooms and halls and everything like that. It was a big challenge for me, with that change,
Yeah.
cultural change. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I can see
Thank-
that being a difference. And then you had to learn some new study habits, right? Put in the work to learn the study habits to go and then get into university and be able to be successful in it. We're through that process where you pass or make it through.
Well, I'll just share.
We're defining success on this, and we'll get to what your definition is. I just threw it out there.
Well, no, I mean, this is because this can be important later in the podcast.
Okay.
Where I define my success and my role is now, and what I think fulfillment is for me now is that, academically, I had at one point had 3 part-time jobs working my way through school. I mean, we're lower middle class income family. 5 kids. My parents were doing a great job raising us, so I had 3 part-time jobs. And student loans, and I didn't have the best study habits, and I didn't spend enough time doing the right things, socializing a bit too much, let's say. And academically, I got kicked out of school. They said, "Oh, you're done." And so that was my, between my sophomore, junior-ish year, because transfer credits and everything. And so again, I want to get back to the point that there's a very important person in my life. So I went back to the dean of engineering. I said, I'm kind of get back into school. I know I messed up. And this is after I got kicked out after my fall semester, and I went home and got my grade report and had to show it to my dad. And that's an experience you'll never forget, and didn't say much. He said, "Okay, what are you going to do?" The same thing, figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, very supportive. I mean, it was not, he didn't shame me. He didn't yell at me, all that kind of stuff. He just looked at me. He goes, "Okay, what are you going to do? This is your life, right? Here you go." So I went back to the dean of the College of Engineering, and he said to me, "Brent," he goes, "why should I let you back in? We have only so many seats here." He goes, "If I let a freshman in, they have say a 1 in 50 chance of graduating, whatever it is." He goes, "We got statistics on people like you. You're 1 in 10,000. Why should I risk that seat on somebody like you?" And so I came back the next day, and he wouldn't see me. I came back the next day, he wouldn't see me. And so I was sitting on the chair, and the secretary said, "The dean won't see you." And I said, "Okay." I said, "I'll sit here until I figure this out." Then the assistant dean called me in, Professor Carl Larson. And he called me in, and he said, "You know what?" He goes, "These are the things you need to do to get back into our school. And, first of all, you got to change your friends. You got to change your location. You got to make this a priority. And he directed me to the Marine Corps. So after I did a summer program, a 10-week program, was called the Platoon Leader Class. I came back. I graduated second in my platoon out of everybody. And I went to the community college, got A's on a couple classes, went back to the assistant dean. And he said, "Okay, we're going to give you a chance." So that's my story.
Yeah, I love that story, and how the assistant dean didn't just let you sit there,
Well, they
and he's
did. They
like,
let me stew.
yeah,
They let
he's
me
like, he's
stew.
gonna figure it out, but he might need a little bit of pointing in direction too,
Oh,
because
yeah.
have they potentially have been through those conversations before? It sounds like they had statistics with some of the different scenarios, but they could also probably see something in you that was like, there is opportunity.
Sure.
And willing to say like, "Hey, here's a potential path that could get you back on a path of, academic success."
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you so much for telling that story, and how that's, that change in maybe what you expected the outcome to be, changed into something potentially different. And you ended up getting into the Marine Corps for that program, and then getting back into school, and eventually then graduating, correct?
Correct. No,
Okay, you were.
No, I did graduate.
Okay.
I think I had like a 2.96 or 2 point something like that. I mean, it was, when I got back, of course, I just started nailing everything. I had the discipline, I had the focus, and that's, but the key here that we'll come back to again later in some of this conversation is the fact that, again, there was somebody there, but they didn't give it to me. It was something you had to figure out. Yeah.
I'm curious about the process that you went through with the Marine Corps, would you say 10-week kind of period? And then you said something about discipline. So you mentioned going in, you had to learn new work ethic, or you had good work ethic, but you had to learn new habits of how to study, how to put, priorities in place. You had maybe some of the wrong crowd that you're hanging out with. And then you went into this program and came out of it maybe with a little bit different perception on what it's going to take for priorities and how to set those?
Yeah.
Or what are some of the main things that you learned from the Marine Corps program that you went through?
Well, it was officer candidate school, and it was um, it, everything I guess you could imagine you might have seen in some of the movies. I
Yeah.
mean, it was, the drill instructor yelling in your face. I mean, it was exhaustive workouts. It was, continuous, very high. They set a very high bar, which I'm very proud of. And the graduation rate was very it was very severe. I mean, there was a significant number of people did not make it through, and that's a credit to the program in its whole. What can I say? It taught me. It really just taught me. Make it. I get. It just sounds just too corny or something, but you make it through the day, make it through this hour. I mean, there's periods of exhaustion, confusion. It's that. You just face and said, okay, I got through that. So I'm going to make it the next day. I'm going to make it the next day. I'm going to make it the next day. And then you're with a cadre, your cohort, and you look around and you see how it formed them and you see how it formed you. The camaraderie is, something you can't even measure, because you really see, that physically, mentally, and psychologically, they tear you down and build you up. I mean, like all military programs do, successful ones do, because you become, a unit. I mean, what they do is they shave your head. They're all in the same uniforms. I mean, your identity changes because you become part of that unit. I was in the Bravo company, third platoon, et cetera. I mean, it was, you just become that part of that unit. It goes back to the hockey. It goes back to racing and sailboats. It comes back to who you are, what your team, what role you fill. Because when you're in there, you'll be you'll be the squad leader. You'll be the platoon leader. You'll be in charge of these men, and you're out doing, um, exercises. You're carrying 40-pound backpack. You're doing close quarters, high speed marches, and people are coming back. They're getting injured, and they're your responsibility. And why was your man injured? So it was yeah. It's it's one of those things. I guess you got to go through, but it formed me, and it's been with me, my whole life since then. Of course.
Yeah, and one of the things that you mentioned that the assistant dean said to you is that you need to change your friends or the people you hang out with,
Yep.
the group that you're with.
Yep.
And then you went through this experience of understanding what it's like to have people around you that are working together for a common good and have each other's best interest in mind almost, right? I'm curious, but I bet that after that experience, it also helped you choose your friends wisely a little bit,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
understand like, okay, now who's going to help build each other up instead of tear each other down after
Mhm.
that experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and that is such an important skill to have throughout life. I know just even as I think back to my first freshman year at Grand Valley and some of the first people I've told this story on this podcast before, but some of the first people that I met at the school, I don't know, it wasn't like, hey, I intentionally was, had this list of people like, hey, I'm only going to hang out with these type of people. But the first people that I met are still people, that were like in my wedding and people that I spent a lot of time with. And they were some of the best people to be around me during
Mhm.
that phase of life and just like really good Christian people that it's like, okay, what are the chances that you walk into a large university, right? And the first people that you meet are those people that are a good influence on your life. It
Uh-huh.
doesn't always happen in that way. Sometimes you have to be a little bit like, okay, that was a miss. Let's move on, right?
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
go to this direction. But
Right.
okay, so you graduated, have your mechanical degree, and you worked 3 jobs throughout that process,
Part-time jobs. Yeah.
part-time jobs. And what were those?
Oh, geez. I worked at Garcia's Pizza.
Okay.
And speaking about that, we still have a reunion, a bunch of us that work there.
Oh,
Every
that's
year we
cool.
go down for homecoming. I worked at a store called Back Racks. Have you heard of it?
Mm-mm.
It's a men's clothing store.
Okay.
They would have everything from suits to shorts to everything, tuxes and everything else, which I learned so much about human behavior in that job. It was I remember telling my parents, I said, if I wasn't an engineer, I would stay at Back Racks and sell clothes. It was just such a dynamic,
Huh.
interesting experience in my life, and I don't know why, but I'm not worried about that.
Yeah.
And then also I worked at a 7-Eleven at a convenience store.
Okay.
Yep.
Probably a different clientele there potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I stacked shelves, swept the floor. A buddy of mine from high school was the manager or assistant manager there.
Okay.
He got me the job. So, anyways, it was, just do whatever he tells you to do, that
So,
kind of stuff.
so then now that you have this degree, you've got some of that work experience, and then you're looking for maybe that first full time, not just a part time job, but now you're looking for one that maybe aligns with some of your career goals. What were you looking for? Did you have just something that popped up or something specific that you're like, okay, this is the type of work that I want to chase now?
Interesting, very interesting. So when I graduated, again, it was one of those things where I just wanted to graduate. For me to have a thought about a career or where I wanted to
Mm.
go, I didn't know. I had an opportunity to become a co-op,
Okay.
and my parents were still living in Illinois. I was going University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. I got a co-op position up at Consumers Power, and there was a director there, Mr. Earhart, and just again, one of these guys was just in my life, put there for a reason. And, I remember he asked me, he said, "So Brent, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Mr. Hurt, I really don't know." And I was terrified by giving him that answer. And he goes, "That's the smartest answer I've ever heard." He goes, "Now you get the chance to discover that."
Mm.
And again, so here, I, I worked with him and for him for, I think 3 co-op sessions. And then after I graduated for a little while, my career took a different path after that. But so it was like, so I suddenly realized, and I think, you hear a lot about that now, people, purpose driven lives. What's your reason here for? People are trying to figure that out. I didn't figure it out. I mean, you know, I just kind of got to where I was at. I said, okay, good. I'm an engineer. And now let's see what I can do with it. You know,
So what did you, and I might have missed it, but what did you do in that co-op? That first co-op? Like what was the role or type of work or
I was there.
industry?
It was at the headquarters in Jackson,
Okay.
and it was an engineering
Yeah.
department, and we had would address issues. If and I got to be honest, I don't remember
Oh,
exactly
yeah.
what I did. I
Yeah.
remember doing some thermodynamic
Okay.
problems, but
Okay.
they had coal fired plants, oil fired plants,
Yeah.
nuclear plants. They had dams.
Ah,
So as
okay.
there's a team of engineers up there, and I don't think I think we were more focused on coal fired plants.
Okay.
I did get a training in their first level training in nuclear power plant operations, and they sent us all out to the nuclear power
Mm.
plant on the south shore of Lake Michigan. I remember going to that training. Learned a lot about, power plants. It was great because, my father's career took him to, shell and tube heat exchangers, and so, my focus as an undergraduate, I enjoyed fluid dynamics and heat transfer and thermodynamics. So consumers was a great opportunity for me. I got to apply my favorite classes,
Mm.
that environment.
And as you got experience in those from your favorite classes, did you feel like it was experiences that helped you double down on, okay, yep, I do want to continue down this path, or I actually know I want to switch into something different?
Well, my career took a turn because the young woman that had met in college at University of Illinois, their family lived in Chicago, and we were going to get married. So I went to go find a job in Chicago, and
Okay.
that's where I left that whole world, and I ended up joining Rockwell International, and they had a division called the Manufacturing Systems Division, and it was c- Rockwell bought this company called Goss,
Okay.
Goss. And when you see these movies and the newspapers are flying around, getting made,
Yeah.
printed, that was a Gauss printing press or a folding machine. At that time, they had 70% of the US market, and so I became worked in the folder division. So that machine that took that web of newspapers and folded it into the Sunday paper,
Mm.
60,000 papers an hour. That
I was
was
gonna say probably pretty slow too, right? No, those things are
no,
moving.
they're moving.
Yeah,
Yeah,
fast.
yeah, yeah.
No, definitely. And as you got into that, as you think through maybe some of the challenges or things that came about that first kind of experience, is there anything that jumps to mind as like, okay, this is something that I had to learn at that phase of life, a skill I didn't have, or something that,
Yeah, yeah. It was okay. So, I don't. I was going to go back a little bit to the when we were first trying when I graduated in 1983. There was a recession. There weren't a lot of jobs. And my roommate and I, his name is Mike. And we were living in an apartment. We would tape all our rejection letters on the wall. Tens of them. Right, covered the whole wall in the
Mhm.
apartment. It was hilarious. But anyways, so when I got that job with consumers, I was overjoyed. And then when I went to Chicago with Rockwell, suddenly I end up in a world where it's all about machines, machine design, tribology, gears, mechanics and materials. I'm like, oh great, I got to learn all this stuff again, right?
Mhm.
And that's when I really started thinking about what do I really, really want to do now that I get to choose what I wanted to do. And I always wanted to work in the space program. To be honest, we call it. I wanted to float. I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to go into space. So I thought, okay, well, what's it going to take to do that? So I went back to school to Illinois Institute of Technology. And I wanted to get my master's degree. And again, here's where a person's in your life. You got to find that person. Sometimes they're presented to you. I went, and so I had poor grades at from. Well, I would. They were C grades, right?
Yeah.
From University of Illinois. And I was talking to Professor Kevin Mead. Again, just a lifesaver. Great man too, a great teacher, great professor. Um, and I took my GRE. The scores were good, but they weren't phenomenal. And he said, "Well, he goes, tell you what, he goes, you can take a class, and if you get an A or a B in this one class, then we'll let you enter into the university." So I took the class. I got a B in it, or maybe an A. I can't remember. It was a math class. Extremely hard, just insanely hard. Anyways, advanced mathematics for engineers. But anyways, the bottom line is I got in, and I graduated from Illinois Institute of Technology with a master's degree, and my focus was in high-speed kinematics and dynamics, and I got a patent with a CAM system that I invented, which Rockwell owned, but because they paid for my college degree. But the idea was, now and my GPA was what, a 3.5, getting a master's
Okay.
degree. I said, "Oh, that's cool,
Yeah.
right?" Yeah. So that's what happened. So again, I figured out what do I really want to do, and I figured how well I'm gonna have to get, I'm gonna get an advanced degree if I want to work at NASA. I've got to present myself knowing that I'm technically able. I've got skills that I can contribute.
And was that a path that was like pretty clear of if you want to work at NASA, if you want to do this type of work, here's the steps that you need to take? Or was kind of like you were kind of figuring it out and being like, well, I think this is maybe what I need to do.
You know, uh, I- there's something about me that I'll just go ahead and make a phone call, and I called NASA, and I called NASA headquarters in Washington
Just
D.C.
figured it out, huh?
Just figured it out, and I said, "All right." I called up. I was speaking to this one from Human Resources, and I said, "So I want to." I want to be an astronaut. She says, "Oh, that's good. You want to be an astronaut?" And I said, "I just want to know what it's like to be an astronaut." And she said, "Well, the first thing you need to do is make sure you graduate from high school." I said, I've got my bachelor's degree and I'm working on my master's degree." And she laughed and I laughed, because I probably sounded like some little kid. How do I become an astronaut?
When I
So
grow up.
when
Yeah.
I grow up, I want to be an astronaut. So anyway, so it was real funny. So that's, and she talked to me and quite frankly about it, and, you remember the movie, The Right Stuff, Apollo 13, all those kind of movies. And, the astronauts were, fighter pilots. The ones at that time, I did a study. I went and looked at, go online at NASA. And back then you had to go to the library, but I could print out all the bios of all the astronauts. You could look at the profile, what age were they, what had they done in their career, all that kind of stuff. And so it was very clear to me, there were civilians that were becoming astronauts now, right? We had astronauts that were on the space station. We were working on developing the space shuttle. So they didn't all necessarily have to be fighter pilots
Mm.
like they were, we saw in Mercury and Gemini and Apollo. So, I thought, well, that's the path I'll take. I'll see if I can get, the third seat, so to speak, or I could be a payload engineer or something like that. So that led me to sharing my life dream with one of my colleagues at Rockwell in Chicago.
Mm.
He goes, "Oh, my uncle works at NASA." I go, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, he's a flight controller." I said, "You're kidding." He goes, If you want, I could contact him and you can go meet him." So part of who I am and what I was is that, they would send me out, and I was a pretty good designer, but not as good as some of these guys. But this in the old days when they had big drafting boards, and the big T squares. And, if you were a good engineer, you got to use on vellum and you got to use ink because the ink was a permanent.
Mm.
But the long story is that I was very good at root cause analysis, field failure analysis. And so I would get sent out to, Fort Worth Star Telegram, the LA Times. I worked at Chicago Tribune. So when there was new designs that needed to get in there, I got a few designs that actually made it onto the printing press. or the folding machine, but they would send me out when there was a problem, and I would go and figure out what's wrong. Why is this not working? Which I still like to do today. I guess it gets back to go figure it out,
Mhm.
right? Yeah. So anyway, so I had a few assignments down in Texas, and so I would take an extra day and I would drive down to NASA at Johnson Space Center, and I met um, the gentleman that introduced me to his uncle. His name was Phil, and Phil introduced me to his uncle, and his uncle was a flight controller since the early, Mercury Gemini Apollo days, still working down there, and he worked in what's called real time ops. So sitting on the green consoles,
Okay.
the astronauts were really in space. You're looking at live data. Their lives and the data is all very important. You bring them home alive, that whole kind of thing, right? Gene Kranz, there is no room for failure. That kind of thing. So I said, well, how do I get a job here? He goes, well, you want to send a letter. And at that time, he worked for Ford Aerospace.
Okay.
So I sent an application into Ford Aerospace, and he helped get in the right hands. And Ford Aerospace offered me a job to go down and be a flight controller. And I went into my boss in Chicago, and I said, Dave, I'm going to give you my letter of resignation. I'm going to get transferred. Will you allow that? I didn't know if there were barriers to that. And he said, yeah, you can do that. And literally the next day, that day, within this Space Shuttle Challenger exploded. We were all watching it on the TV, and I had just quit my job. And boom, it was tragedy, of course. And so I got a letter from Ford Aerospace said, you understand we've got to retract the offer. We can't hire you. So like, oh, yeah. So long story short, I continued working on my master's degree, got my master's degree. The space shuttle program, I think was it 2, 3 years, 4 years in gap in time, but they were getting ready to start doing the next launches. So at that point, Rockwell International took over the contract from Ford Aerospace. So I requested to do an internal transfer, and I got a job down at Johnson Space Center as a flight controller.
And now you're getting into that dream career that you've been thinking about, over the last several years and working towards with grad school and kind of working that process. And now you're getting the chance to do it.
Yep.
And so was it everything you thought it was going to be, or were there some things as you jumped into it that were like, okay, this isn't really what I thought, this was all set up to be?
Dream job.
I believe it.
Dream
Yeah.
job. And I worked 13 missions while I was down there. STS-26, return to flight. All the way. I think it was STS-42. Each mission was different. Each was challenging. What they would do is you would have a flight control team. So for every person you see in the front room in the big, where there's a flight director and all those rows of green cabinets with the monitors on them and the big screen in front, there's 2 or 3 people, maybe more, in a back room for each one of those positions. So you start out, you're in the back room, right? You learn the skills. They break down a very complex system. The space shuttle had 3 or 4 times redundancy in many systems, and so you're looking at all the switches, the valves. I was in a system called OMS RCS, orbital maneuvering system and reaction control system. And so, you had to worry about how much fuel was, how much oxidizer, how much fuel, where the valves were. We connected into a system called GNC. What happens though is that for 1, 2, 3 years, there's a flight control team, and there's the astronauts that are associated with. There's a team of trainers for the flight controllers and a team of trainers for the astronauts. And so you become a team, much like in the Marine Corps, much like on a hockey team, even at a higher level. So you see these people every day, and you're reading the rules, you're reading the system. You have what's called bingo numbers. You have a priority list of tasks that have to get done. So I've never experienced anything like that in my life, but I've yet tried to carry that experience to wherever I went, because, I guess a lot of people understand the football analogy, right? There's a quarterback. The quarterback does certain things, but a lineman do different things. Is a quarterback more important than a lineman? Goodness, no, right? I mean, they might have a different skill set. It might be much more visible. But if you watch a football game today, and there's what's happening on the line on both the offensive and defensive side of the line is as interesting and dynamic and exciting as what you're seeing the quarterback and the receivers and running backs are doing. Anyways, going back to the analogy, I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but you have that team structure and everyone knows what they're going to do, and I found, and I can't claim this for everybody, but personalities kind of get put to the side when you have people's lives on your line, right? They're in space. The ascent phase is very challenging, as we understand. It's very dangerous. Reentry is very dangerous. Orbital, they break the mission up into those three phases: ascent entry, and then there's, or I guess you call it two phases, but there's the ascent entry team, then the orbital phase. They all present different challenges, and it's all around mission success. And what do you define success as? What would you think? What's success for
Getting
mission?
home.
Get them home alive.
Yep.
Yeah, get them home alive. Yeah.
And I'm curious, as you're getting started and getting into that team, it sounds like everyone had very clear definition of what their role was and what their job function was, and everyone knew, what each other, needed to do to ensure that that success happened. Was that just really good training? Was that just getting the right people? Is that a combination? Like, how do you think that it was set up in such a structure that everyone was able to function at that such high level in those situations?
Well, I mean, so, there's a whole interview process when you get there, and that you start training, quite honestly, by reading a book, right? So, you'll have a system, and there'll be diagrams in those systems. There's valves, there's electronics, there's, if your system has memory, or if it has a power unit associated with it, and you had to memorize that system, and there was the nomenclature that went with it, everything, and you had to sign off on it, and then, you would take a test and a quiz, and then you would participate in, simulations where there were just, flight controllers in the simulator, in the simulation room. The astronauts might not even be, they might have the astronauts may or may not be in a fixed base system, or they might be in a motion-based system. But the point is the trainers, the simulation people, they would throw problems at you,
Okay.
right? And they would record everything. And afterwards, you would have a debrief, and they'd say, "This is what you did wrong. This is what you did wrong. This is what you did wrong." And you found out, through the training, the dedication to learn the systems, to learn the nomenclature. You're wearing a headset there, and you're listening to 3, 4 conversations at a time, and you're tracking numbers on the screen. Pressures may be dropping, fuel levels may be dropping. What does that mean? Is it temperature related? Is there a leaking jet, et cetera? And then you've got rules that go with that. And these rules, just like the rules we have today in society, they evolved based on mistakes that happened. Why do we have a four-way stop sign? Because people are driving through it and they're hitting each other, right? No one's yielding to each other. So we had to put a four-way stop sign in. Oh, well, why do we have speed limits? Well, speed limits because you're near a school and you shouldn't be doing 55 in front of a school, right? So the same thing, and when you build, this whole idea of building mission flight rules is based on the same thing. So if you have these two jets go down on a yawing axis, what's your backup plan, right? So that's why you have quad and triple redundancy on a number of these, on a number of components of the system of the space shuttle. Anyways, was there selection and training process? Yeah, you knew who was good and who wasn't. So you would start in the case of our system, there were two backroom positions. One had to do more with the fuel and the oxidizer. The other one had to do with the system configuration of the valves and the switches and the jets. And then, you would get certified in each one. So you get certified in the propulsion side for an orbital mission. Then you would get the second seat, and then you would swap, and you get certified in those. And then if you got good enough, then you would move to the front room. You might do an orbital mission in the front room, right? And just like anything else, there's 3 shifts. The astronauts are in orbit the whole time. So, there's an opportunity for you to work on that. And then, then you ultimately end up into the ascent entry phases, which are very dynamic. So, I
And
don't know.
about how much, uh, on average, how much time would it take someone to get through all those certifications and go through that process to get the chance to be involved on the final phase?
Well, it depended on the individual, right? And I don't recall exactly. I mean, I worked in the back room on STS 26. I think I was there maybe 6 months.
Okay.
On the orbital side of the mission. It was a very benign mission. The goal of that mission, primary goal of that mission, is just to return to flight. I don't even remember what the payload was, but the launch, just watching the launch and participating in the mission, the fact we were back in business was That, was the whole focus.
Mm.
Yeah, that was we demonstrate our capabilities. Mhm.
And how long did you hold that position, and how long were you I mean, you mentioned the
Yeah.
amount of different, missions that you did, but how long a period of time was that?
Well, I was at NASA for 5 years,
Okay.
and, like I said, 13 missions, and I don't remember all of them. I have to go back and look at my notes, how long
Yeah.
it took me to get to every different position, because also it decided on was, you know, was somebody else leaving that position, and they're going on their career in different roles. So just because, as a flight controller, you can go in a lot of different directions. You could go work on advanced orbital systems. You could be an administrator of NASA at different levels. So there are people, and then, as a contractor with Rockwell, we had different roles as well, where our roles were more just staying on the council and becoming proficient expert flight controllers in your discipline. So,
Mm.
but I don't. I'd have to go back and look at my notes. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's fine, and, I'm curious, at this phase of life too, are you, um, starting a family at that phase? Are you married? Anything, and you mentioned you moved to Chicago with, or because you met someone at that phase,
Mhm.
or tell me a little bit about that side of your story.
That was um, love is what love is,
Yeah,
right? The heart loves what the heart loves.
yeah.
But um, that was a great time in my life. It was, I'd never lived in a big city
Yeah.
before. That was quite exciting, and made some great friends there. I'm still very close with a friend there, Berta, and her family, and I had some other great relationships up there. But I was single when I was down at
Okay.
NASA. Yeah.
Yeah, and then so you went through NASA, you mentioned you've been there for 5 years, and you're now onto what's next, right? And what
Oh,
was that?
geez, what a great story. So I was down there, and there's these guys, like, and one of them's name is Peter Diamandis. I can't remember all the other ones, but they started a program called the International Space University.
Mm,
And at this point in the 90s, the wall came down, right? It's
mm.
obviously wall came down, and there was more of this, international collaboration,
Yeah.
and so this group of gentlemen started the International Space University, and it started out summer programs, and I applied to go to the International Space University, and they went. I was in the second class. It was in Toronto in 1990, another 10-week program, and I said, "This is for me," because they would study space physics, space humanities, space law. So you had a 10-week program, and they immerse you in all these different space-related topics. And at the time, I'm forgetting the exact numbers, but I think we had 110 students from, I'm gonna guess the number, 30 countries. We had students that, and you had to be working to join the university, you had to be working in for a space agency.
Okay.
You had to have an advanced degree, so I qualified on both of those, and then you had to speak a foreign language and, get sponsorship. So it was an expensive program for the summer, and again, I had to figure that out, but there were students from the former Soviet Union, from China, all over European countries, South American as well. And so we had, 100 students or more, and from all these different countries is studying this international space program as a business as well as the science side. Yeah,
Mm.
it was an amazing experience. Yeah.
And as you got into that, I mean, I'm sure that multiple different cultures coming together, you had to learn some different potential skills from communication, from, hey, how are we going to collaborate together? Are those things that you felt like just were kind of natural for you?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and one of the things they did, which was great, we toured part of the Canadian country as well, but we had exercises together, we had projects together, we had exams, we had to study together, but they would give us breaks in the day, and we would go out and play soccer, and so I still remember we played soccer against, again for so many students, they're from all around the world. It was co-ed, and there were cultural differences on how women engineers and women soccer players, and it was like, they would I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." But, there was one of the engineers there, he had been on the second level, Soviet hockey team, whatever, the red team, so but he didn't make it to the tier team, whatever, and playing against that talent level was, we both played hockey, we both were, He was a phenomenal soccer player. It was a blast. So I mean, what that did is culturally, you play games. Games are a very powerful way to break down barriers, because you've got rules. Okay, this is how we're going to interact. The rules of the game are the same, whether you speak Chinese or you speak Italian or you speak American. I mean, so these are the rules, and this is how we're going to work together. And you don't pick teams. You kind of pick teams when you get on the field. So you may be playing with and against different people every different day, and it was tons of fun. Just tons of fun. So when you're talking about what are these cultural differences and how do you deal with them, there was no training in that. We just kind of did it.
Mm.
We all had a shared passion for the exploration of space.
Mm.
That's a unifying theme that everyone, much like at NASA, the idea is the unifying theme is, we're going to take these men and women into space. They're going to do some amazing things with experiments and study the world, the outer space as well as the Earth, and we're going to bring them back alive. I mean, that unifying theme was, hey, we all love something about space. It was just phenomenal.
And
Yeah.
do you have maybe one specific project or one specific example of something that you had the chance to work on while you were there?
At the International Space University,
Yeah.
we had a project called the International Asteroid Mission.
Okay.
So we had to come up with an engineering design on how we were going to mine an asteroid.
Interesting.
Yeah, so we still got the book. Yeah, we did the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay. And can you tell me a little bit more?
So I mean, the idea was, we were gonna our problem wasn't necessarily how do you get to the asteroid like they
Yeah.
are today. The problem they posed to us is how do you get minerals off of that and you bring it back to Earth. And so we designed a system that that would basically create a rectangular area and with a cloth over it, and we would just at the corners ignite little blasting caps. The energy would cause it to get up in there. We would capture that into that sort of bag system, is what I remember. I mean, it's just we had 10 weeks.
How could you not have fun, right?
Yeah,
Going through this and,
Yeah.
working with smart people and
Yeah.
on projects that obviously are things that are life-changing and ones
Yeah.
that haven't been experienced before. And I'm assuming that going through some of those experiences led you towards, what you've gotten into today even and what you're working on these days, right? So let's jump ahead just a
Sure.
little bit
Okay.
into after that experience. Maybe tell me a little bit more about what you're doing today, but a couple of the steps between.
Yeah, so the steps between real quickly, I'll do it very quickly because of time, but that whole International Space University, getting my master's degree, still pursuing to be an astronaut. At this point, after 3, 4, 5 years, I've made some friends with a few astronauts, and tons of flight controllers, a lot of great people across NASA. And again, I'm like, okay, what do I need to do? And they just turn to me, they go, "Well, you don't have an MD or you don't have a PhD." And I said, "Okay." So I went and applied to, and at this point now I was married and I had one son. And I started my PhD program at the University of Texas at Austin. So I left NASA with one son, and my experience of going to school at night and working full time, I told my wife, and she was so wonderful. I said, I'm not doing that again.
Yeah. Don't ask.
I said, you don't know, you weren't around, but you have no life.
Mm.
Either as an engineering student, first of all, engineering students work very hard to get their bachelor degree, and it's just as many people do that pursue advanced degrees, but when you're working full time, and then so I said no. So I left my job, took all my retirement money, and invested in my PhD. And again, who was around there? Another person in my life, Professor Del Tesser,
Mm.
took me under his wing. He had a leading robotics program, robotics research group at that time, internationally recognized. And so I, again, did all the research, go figure it out. I applied to 10 different universities, got accepted to Cornell, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, a couple of others, but I got a full ride basically. So that's why I'm a Longhorn.
Mm.
So, anyways, that's speeding that ahead. I graduated with a degree from it was the department was mechanical engineering. The sub department was systems engineering, and my focus was in robotics. And so I left that and I joined a company called Southwest Research Institute in San Antonio, Texas, because NASA was going through a riff. And Robin, my wife, was pregnant with our second one. And so I had to get a job. So I, again, went out and worked Southwest Research Institute. Phenomenal experience. It just blew my mind. But it is, don't know if I may be wrong. People can correct me. It's the largest not-for-profit applied research and development institution in the United States that is not owned by the government. It's not part of a university. So it's a completely independent applied research and development institute. At the time, I think when I left, they had 3,000 engineers. I was there for 11 years, and my career grew from being a senior research engineer all the way up to an assistant director, and then the heir apparent to become the director. So that was how I got into what I call now intelligent systems.
And as that role, were you in a leadership role then as well in some of those positions?
This is going to tie back to being working and getting my first lawnmower job. Was that when I joined the institute, I didn't know this, but part of what you had to do was you had to write proposals to get funding. They had an internal research and development program, but also they schooled you and taught you how you would go out and reach out to clients, and you would find out what their needs were. So in the world, there's only two things people have. They have dreams and they have pains. You're solving one of those two. And in the department I was in was called advanced manufacturing at the time. We solved problems for General Motors, for Frito-Lay, for the DoD, for the Air Force, et cetera. So one of the things I learned there was that how to write a proposal and how do you figure out, what they want. And so I had, a great boss is Les took me on the road with him and where he would start getting presentations and marketing to different clients and, finding out what they needed. And I developed a skill in that, and one of the things also I learned there was that when you write a proposal, you call human resources or accounting and you find out what everybody's salary is because you pick just like you would on a football team or baseball or your sailboat or your hockey team. I want Jim, I want Mary, she's going to be my AI person. There's going to be my mechanical engineer. And then you put a budget and a proposal together. You say, well, you have meetings with all of them. How long will it take you to do this? Let's put together a Gantt chart. Things that all you know as an engineer. But you see everyone's salary, and that salary goes all the way up to your boss's boss, and then the vice president of your division. And I looked at and you know what their hourly rate was, and you're looking at that, and then you learn things about overhead, fringe, as you well know, as a businessman yourself, and suddenly you have a deep appreciation for, the dynamics, the mathematics, the economics of running a project. There's the engineering side. And then there's the financial side. And the most important part is obviously the people side, as you know. Yeah.
I kind of tie this. I know it's a little bit of a parallel topic, but tie it back to just small business ownership and those that are starting up their first companies and things like this as well. A lot of times they chase that top line revenue number, right? I want to build $1 million business or $10 million business, whatever. They're building this, looking at the top line of sales.
Yeah.
But hey, are we really paying attention to the right numbers? Because you could have a $10 million business and still lose money.
Oh,
And at the end of the day, it's not that hard to do. So
yeah,
make sure that you're paying attention to the right numbers, right? And make sure that you're looking at, hey, what's profit and loss, and what is my efficiencies and those key metrics that you were looking at. A little bit different of a context, but some parallels there.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, you write a proposal and you get requirements from the client. I want a manufacturing system that produces X number of potato chips an hour and, et cetera, and this kind of waste. And then, you're building a new system. Well, you have certain assumptions that you don't know. And then all of a sudden when you're building the system, there's discoveries and you have to go back to the client and say, oh, you know how we thought the component A would be able to produce, X number of units and because they break it up in the subsystem and, then you're renegotiating the contract and rescoping and it's a very complex, role as a project manager. So I started out as a project manager, writing my own proposals and bringing work in. And then I grew and I got promoted up through, the management ranks to, like I said, the assistant director and then the heir apparent director. Yeah.
And it sounds like a different pace and maybe a little bit different from what you were doing before, but it sounds like you were successful in it and you enjoyed it.
I did. The thing I liked about it the most, again, was just a phenomenal number of people and the resources they had at the institute. You could get anything you needed, essentially anything you needed there done on their campus. They had a 200-acre campus and they had every resource you wanted from like what we're doing right now. They didn't do podcasts back then, but they had a video group, they had the human resources, accounting, billing, but then not only that, you had brilliant people, just brilliant people. You just, even, you're shadowed by them. And one thing you need to walk away from real quick is your ego and find better people than you because, just brilliant people that solving very complex problems. The Pluto mission is one of the missions that Southwest Research Institute is famous for. That they do a number of work for 3-letter agencies, every major manufacturing company you can think of. It's just the people down there are brilliant, and they do very, very high quality work. Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing you said about setting your ego aside, I think maybe some people that are listening to podcasts need to hear, but maybe they could share it with someone else too, because that is something that it's also a skill that we all need to understand. Is like we know what we know, but we don't know what others know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just thinking about that and saying, I don't know what you know, but it's what you know is probably something that's going to help us in this project and moving things forward. So awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Now, as we progress, what are you up to today, and what do you got going on?
So, very quickly paced, I went from Southwest Research Institute for 11 years to the University of Texas, San Antonio, started a lab there. They recruited me away. That's a whole nother story. Then I got into this whole entrepreneurial world.
Yeah.
My brother and a friend of his came up with an idea. They in life sciences, and remotely I was working with him on this project. And then my parents' health started declining, so I wanted to get back to Michigan. So I've been in Texas now for 25 years, and I approached some people in economic development in the Grand Rapids area. Kevin McCurran, was one of them, and he networked me around. And Western University was looking at me, and I talked to GVSU, and I met Paul Potowski. So he offered me a position as an associate. Well, initially it was visiting professor. Then I became an associate professor. Then I launched the Applied Medical Device Institute, where I worked on with a team, leveraging the faculty and students to help entrepreneurs, small startups, develop medical devices. That was our focus. And we were in the tall white building on Michigan. They're at the top of the hill, the big GVSU Life Sciences building up there. Yeah.
And I love that. And some of the startup opportunities that you provided through that program probably had massive impacts over the years as well.
Oh, huge. I mean, we had, I think we had about $5 million worth of business in the 11 years I was there. 60 projects, 20 of them were repeat clients coming back. We worked with Michigan Economic Development Corporation, MEDC, worked with Stark Garden. You might have heard of Stark Garden, so we tried to leverage, this economic development money, matching funds. So we had small and medium-sized companies we were working with that are still in town today. And we would provide engineering services for them, and a huge opportunity for the students to learn. They were getting paid. I can't believe, I think a dozen paid. The work I brought in funded, I think, at least a dozen graduate students, and then probably 3 times as many undergraduate students. So the students got to work on real projects side by side with real world engineers and startup companies. Yeah.
And these startup companies getting access to talent and, that level of experience with you and the team there is probably, they were probably jumping on it, right? And
Yeah.
It was great. I don't know how they would tap into it in other ways. So that is awesome to have that set up at Grand Valley, and you're associate professor. What courses were you teaching?
I was only a professor teaching for the first 3 years, I think, because when I took over the Applied Medical Device Institute, I became the executive director, and I got out of the teaching role. Yeah,
okay.
but I taught dynamics. We had an entry-level engineering course that tried to combine introduction to computer science, to SolidWorks. You would build a robot, when you learn SolidWorks, you would learn a little bit about Simulink and MATLAB. You get to work with the Arduino cards, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I taught that class for a while.
Yeah, love it. Yep.
Yeah.
Very familiar with that whole world and system. Yep, for sure. So
did they have that course there when you were there? Was it the combined course, or was it separate courses?
it was separate.
Oh,
But
okay.
yep. Yeah, and it wasn't even SolidWorks, when I was there either. So
Yeah.
but things change. So
Yeah.
which is exciting. And so now you've you mentioned, as we were having earlier conversations, that you're doing some fractional CTO work today.
Right. So what, we're talking about success and failure, but also fulfillment.
Yeah.
What's success to you? And throughout my career, like I said, there was always somebody there at the right time that saw something in me or said, oh, this guy needs some more rough edges worn off. And when I was a professor at the University of Texas, San Antonio, there was a young lady that came in, and she was failing, and she was crying in my office, and she was a single mom. She's living at home with her mom, and she's working full time trying to be an engineer. And from my experience at University of Illinois, I there's several students throughout my career at UTSA and GVSU, and even my career as a professional, that I'm going to help that person out. This person, I'm going to give them the chance, right? This young lady, I tutored her, gave her extra time on exams and such, and not unfairly. I mean, the idea was she was leaving work, and so she couldn't get to the time when the exam was scheduled. So
Mhm.
we'd schedule private time so she could have her exam with some other students. So it was opportunities I provided to many of the students. And then she graduated. She was failing, and by the end of the semester, I called her in my office. I want to tell you, congratulations, you got a B plus in the class, and great stories like that. So what I'm doing now is what's called a fractional CTO role. I also have a medical device startup that is pre-revenue, is not generating revenue, but we're still trying to bring it to human trials. That's another story. But um, the fractional CTO role is one where you integrate yourself with the C-level team.
Mm.
So you will still have hiring, firing responsibility. It could be a 6 to 9 month engagement, but what I've become, like I said, that building on some previous experiences around root cause failure analysis, figuring out what's not working in the economics of the business, in the personnel relationship side of the business. Does everyone share the vision and mission? What is this mission and vision? Why are you not making milestones? So as a fractional CTO, I come in with, we get a budget, we put a team together. Sometimes I'll bring in some of my talent. Sometimes we'll work with their talent, and working side by side. The problems are typically I'm working with companies, in the 10 to 20, $30 million range where they may want to scale. So, hey, we're making $10 million a year. We want to make it to $22 million. How do we scale? But we don't have a big budget to hire a bunch of people. So let's go inside your processes. And you, Stephen, as a former business person, when you grow a company, you build processes and procedures that worked when you were small, but when you grow, necessarily they don't grow and scale as well.
You break them pretty quick,
You
huh?
break them pretty quick, yeah, and the people that work in a small company sometimes don't work as well in the big company, and new pressures, new roles and responsibilities, so that's what I'm doing. I go in, they may be scaling, they maybe wanna go from they may be an automotive manufacturing company, but they wanna get into medical devices. There's a company that, might make very small springs that I'm talking to, and they use them in the automotive industry, but could we use these springs in the medical device arena? Yes, but there's things like ISO 13485, there's FDA, you've got to get sterilization and packaging. You've got to have a legacy on your paperwork, your design history files, et cetera. So again, complex systems. It's a system overview from everything from regulatory to economics, what's your market size, who's your target market, all the things that you're familiar with too as a small businessman yourself. Yeah.
You mentioned, maybe you answered this already but you said automotive and then you said med device. Like, are most of these companies med device companies then?
I'm targeting right now, because for the last, honestly, 25 years, I've been working in the health
Yeah.
sciences field, the med device field. Um, and I've worked with a lot of startups and they've been successful. So yes, but my niche is not that narrow because there are people that want to enter the med device space, or there's med device companies that might want to broaden themselves into the consumer market, so, or I'm talking to a company right now that has gone through a significant downturn.
Mhm.
Their revenues literally were about 50%. So they're saying, wait a minute, we need to, what's going on here? Let's figure this out. So as a fractional CTO, you come in and you're basically part of the team, and you, as a new fresh set of eyes with a lot of tools, everything from, marketing tools to, tools, AI tools, agents that you can use to actually enhance the corporate performance. Menial tasks that you might do in an Excel spreadsheet that have three people touch this Excel spreadsheet. Why do you have three people touch that Excel spreadsheet? Well, we've done that. That's how we've always done it. Okay, here's a tool you can use. It could be a product offline, or here's one that we can write some scripts for you and we can, streamline that so one person touches it. Those
You,
kind of things.
yeah, and you mentioned that you fulfillment as you got into describing this role and being a fractional CTO. And I'm wondering if you feel like you can see the impacts of pulling from your experience, pulling from your knowledge, pulling from, what you've learned over the years and be able to really direct that in a short period of time into a business and just see impacts pretty quickly. Is that what you mean when you say fulfillment almost? Is that you're seeing those impacts quickly from your experience and putting that into those businesses?
Also, I'm fortunate enough right now that I can be somewhat selective, and so the terminology I use are mission-driven companies. So somebody that has a vision and a mission that they want to accomplish. It's not, it's the profit. You can have a not-for-profit company, but it still has to operate in the black.
Mm,
Right? Mission-driven companies could be a not-for-profit. Mission-driven company could be around healthcare. How can you provide affordable healthcare to everybody?
mm,
And what are the tools you're developing to do that? In the case of my medical device company, I've been working on it for well over a decade. We're trying to disrupt how bones heal today. And monitoring how bones heal and how medical professionals make decisions around that without the use of X-rays. That is something that is addressing a gap in healthcare that with the technology today we can solve. It would, people more productive, less painful procedures that they might have to do if there's a wrong diagnosis. So these are things that are helping people today, whether it's farmers, if someone has a company that's dealing with, migrant workers and farmers, and how can we get, people better health care
mm.
that are, in the migrant population, or get them access to resources, whether it's a software application or hardware devices, et cetera.
I
It's
love
just,
that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And I
it's,
love that you're being intentional about, not just chasing the paycheck when it comes, because you probably can, charge a decent amount when you go for fractional CTO, and you probably can pick companies that are going to pay a good amount, but you're being very intentional and making sure that it's like, doesn't matter, you need to make money, but you need to have a mission tied to what your business is doing as well.
Yeah, I think one key I really want to stress and highlight is value. When I talk to my potential clients, it's not about how much are you going to pay me. It's how much value are we going to bring to your company. Is it a 10x return on your investment? Right. So it's not, it's not, oh, my hourly rate is this, and that's
Mm,
what you're going to have to pay me, and I'm going to be working 10, 20 hours a week. That's not how the conversation is structured. The conversation is structured about what's your vision, what's your mission for this company, how do you want to get there? And if you want to go from 10 to $22 million, how are we going to do that? Do you have a budget for that? And this not even talking about me.
mhm.
I don't talk about what I'm going to get paid. It's the what and why questions you want to pose them with. What do you want to do? Or what do you do with this process there? Why do you do that process there? Let's figure this out. And um, you know, corporations and companies, whether medium, small size, or large, they evolve, and like I said, mentioned as I alluding to earlier, they change, and they don't realize they've changed. You know, right? Because it's a mission and vision that everyone has to really buy into as
Mm.
well. It's not just a nameplate on the wall and people walk by and they don't. It's not a script on the wall that people just walk by and say, "Yeah, that's nice." Yeah, if you ask your employees, "What's your mission? What's our mission today?"
Mm.
What's the phrase I heard? I gotta think of this real quick. Um, your massively transformational purpose that's what it's called.
Mm.
That was a phrase I was introduced to yesterday. Like today, I mean, why are you doing this podcast? So what are you going to do with this? Whose life are you going to transform? Is today 1% better than yesterday
Mm.
in your community and your employees and everything else, right?
Yeah, those are definitely important questions just to continue to reflect on and come back to and realign with. And I think sometimes we get into the hustle and bustle of getting, things done. And sometimes, just put our heads down and then look up and we're like, oh, wait, if I would have continued to ask myself, a little bit more of the why, what's the mission, what's my North Star, what am I working towards, then I wouldn't have found myself over here. Right. I would have found myself maybe a little bit closer. So realigning with being intentional about your vision, being intentional about your mission, and setting that out, but then realigning with it consistently too.
Yeah. Can I share two stories real
Yeah,
quick? All right.
100%.
So one of them is Dragan Jovanovic.
Okay.
And Dragan, my boss at the time was Maury Blomberg. Maury was a World War II bombardier. He was the navigator on the plane, and Maury always had a cigar in his mouth. He had a flat white top head, and he would be bitter because I can't smoke inside anymore. But they didn't say I couldn't chew on this thing. Anyways, Maury was a character, and the Dragan Jovanovic was one of his engineers. And Dragon used to be the manager of the CAD group, which used to be the drafters. And then, we started coming up with computer aided design. And back then, you kids out there, we had mainframes that were computer aided design, and you had to pen it hit the window. And he was the manager of that group, and he requested to give up the position to go back to be an engineer. And here I am, a young, hard-charging engineer going, wanting to climb the ladder. I go, why would you give up a management position? You could have done so much, made so much more money. He goes, Brent, he goes, I fought in World War II. And he goes, I was captured and escaped from 2 Italian prisons of war. I was a prisoner of war, and I'm a Serbian and I have a knife and I, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, you know what? When I put my head on the pillow at night, I go to sleep. I don't toss and turn. I don't wake up in the middle of the night. And that was one of those lessons, like I said, that people are going to tell you. And it stuck with me. This guy it was more important for him to be fine. He found peace. He didn't want the management position where people were barking him on this side and upper management was barking on that side. He found peace. And his peace was in being an engineer. And that's what he needed to do. And he would go to sleep at night. And he was a content man.
I have this dialogue with several friends. We'll get together and just have this conversation of the ability to be satisfied and content versus the effects of drive and wanting to be better and do more, right?
Yeah.
And the balance between the two.
Yeah.
Right. And, some have a little bit easier of a time, being content, and some still can be satisfied in not being content, if that makes sense, like growing towards the next thing. So I'd love to hear that story. So thanks for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome.
You mentioned you had a second one too.
Yeah, it was more of a metaphor as a sailor. My career as an engineer, and understanding what these different men have given me opportunities to do, and teachers, I should say people, because it was men and women that gave me a chance to become who I am today. And the metaphor is more along, sailing, as if you race a sailboat, I do out in an inland lake here, Reeves Lake here in town, and racing a very competitive fleet, many national champions. And I grew up racing sailboats with my family. And I was so frustrated, just angry, like, I get off the lake. I didn't win. Why didn't I win? I had a horrible start. What am I doing wrong? And there's a guy at our club, and Eric, this is one for you, Eric. Shout out to Eric. And then he goes, Brent, he goes, when I'm sailing, he goes, this is what I do for pleasure. This is my hobby. He goes, if I'm not having fun, what am I doing out here? And it was a mic drop moment for me. Boing. I'm like, oh my God. Here I'm spending my weekends and my weeknights out here. This is supposed to be fun for me. And it's that balance of where, of course, I want to be a better sailor. Of course, I always want to win. But to the point where I hate sailing, I'm angry when I get off the water. I'm angry when I'm on the water. I go home and I friend. So it was, as a sailor, you can never predict where the winds are going to be. The winds shift all the time. They're going to change direction on you. And so the metaphor is, which applies to my engineering career through my whole life, is I had to change direction. How many people suffered through the automotive downturn? And then 3, 5, 10 years later, we have COVID. You don't know what life is going to throw at you. You have to learn to adapt, and you just got to figure it out, and then the second piece of that is, you're at the point right now, Stephen, where you've got kids and you got to take care of your kids. So my question is, am I in a moment of joy? Am I in a moment of peace where I can lay my head on the pillow like Dragon? Well, I can choose what I'm going to do and can't do, because my kids are all adult kids now, and they're launched and they're on their way. You have a more difficult problem right now. Your challenges are, I've got my kids, I've got a wife. I'm going to have to suffer through this a little more. I can't change course like Brent's going to be able to change course.
Yeah.
So, but that's the metaphor I use, and I like to try to share with my kids, is that the wind's going to change. Like I said, COVID, the automotive industry, just be prepared to adapt. Have those tools. Figure it out.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
You're welcome.
sharing that. And just to camp on that a little bit, and sometimes we get so tied up in, hey, I need to have control, right? I have this plan
Yes.
and it's not aligning with my plan. I'm a project manager, right? The due date's the due date, the due date, and this is how things are supposed to happen in life. So,
Yeah.
some are planners a little bit more and they're like, "Oh, that didn't happen according to plan
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the winds blew a different direction than expected." And it can be difficult, right? To, change your mindset and switch and say, "Okay, now I'm going this direction. It's going to potentially be a better direction than what I
Yeah.
even expected or thought about." Wow, and you don't realize some of those things until you're in it or until later. It's tough when sometimes you're in those seasons of a door getting shut, having, getting kicked out of school or, losing a job or some of those other things. Those are periods of time when it's tough. And you just need to show up the next day
Yes.
and show up the next
Yes.
day and show
Yes.
up the next day. Right. And then
Yeah.
you'll take a look back sometimes and be like, oh, there was a reason for all that.
I two quick things. You're so wise on this, but I didn't get kicked out of school. I earned it. I used to tell my students that don't thank me for an A because you earned the A, and don't thank me or don't blame me for the F. You earned that as well. And I took
Mm.
complete responsibility for that. But going back to your discussion, and this is going back to people who are engineers and business people, and you're going to have competitors in the company you're working with or for or outside. And that's the same thing in sailing. Your competitors, when you're racing in a sailboat, we're all trying to go for that same mark. It's called you sail to one mark and you turn around, you go on a pattern. But your competitors are going to cause you to have to adapt and change as well. And you'll be frustrated on the water, but like you said, it may be a situation that actually your competitor who was in a strategically better position that required you to adapt puts you in a better position, 10 minutes later down along the lake, along the course. So, again, you're wise. When you're driving as hard as you're driving and these problems are coming up, the big guy upstairs, he's my boss. There's a plan that we have no idea. So the best thing to do is, be present in the moment, figure out why it's happened if you can. There's root causes. Sometimes you're not going to figure it out, and sometimes you can't fix it, but, adapt and survive.
I love it. And I usually get to this point of the conversation and ask a question of, hey, what would if you went back and told yourself something from your childhood, now that you know what you know, what would you tell yourself? And I feel like you've already, for the last 5 minutes, we've been talking about things that, are great value bombs, if you want to call them that you would give someone that's younger that has the opportunity to, think about it as they change their trajectory. But anything additional that you would add? Maybe
Yes,
something
it's
that you
one word. This is, just amazing. The word is forgive. Forgive yourself because you're going to make mistakes. Forgive the person that wronged you because right now there's someone's telling a story about you that you are the evil person. We all think that we've been troubled in life and it's been unfair. We've all had that story in our head, but the reality is we were in that position. We made certain decisions, and I've made many mistakes, many that I haven't even shared here. But you've got to look at yourself and say, okay, I made that mistake for a variety of reasons, and then you got to look at the people outside you and forgive them as well. Maybe they are in a position where if they lose this job, they're going to lose their house. And so, they're driving so hard that you're no longer a person. Their career, they're charging so hard in their career. They're trying to be so successful, and you're just in their way. Does that make them evil? Should they treat you that way? No. But the bottom line is you don't know what people are going through. Um, it's you don't know their history. It doesn't give them permission to treat you poorly. But on the other hand, you have to learn how to deal with that. And again, adapt and survive. And I should say adapt and thrive. But the reality is, you'll get to a point, hopefully, where you forgive yourself and forgive other people. Just forgive.
Yeah, I love that word.
Yeah.
And again, something that's, important to remember and wise to hear. And some people need to hear that right now, right?
Yeah.
Because they're sitting on something that it's actually ruining more of their day, ruining more of their life, ruining more of the relationships than if they would have gone through that phase
Yeah.
of forgiveness. But it can be difficult. And it's something that, again, is hard. But with hard decisions and hard choices, maybe on the other end, again, come greater opportunities and greater
Exactly.
relationships.
Good
And
summary.
yeah, so
Yeah.
thank you again so much for being on the Engineered Success podcast. I just have one additional question. It's what we end every single podcast with. And so I really would love to hear, you've hinted at it already, but what is your definition of success?
It's I don't know. What a hard question. It's okay. Well, let me just say this. It's contextual. Going back to sailing, it depends on, am I out sailing and I'm out to do the best job I can? Um, do I need to win that race? No, I don't need to win the race. Am I having fun? So success in sailing for me now is doing better than the last time racing the sailboat, and enjoying myself. What's success today? Well, my kids are. If one of the questions you had that I heard was, you know, what would you say one of your greatest successes are? My family, my kids, my
Mhm.
kids and my family. I'm still close friends with many of my brothers. I mean, we live across the street from each other. Extended families, communities is success. Yeah, it's not the money. Is it a life balance? We talk. Ever hear that? You ever hear that now? Everyone's talking about what's your work life balance.
It's work life integration now.
Oh, is it work life integration? Or,
Yeah.
what's your work life integration? I don't know. It's like, it's just
Yeah.
it's you hear the other things people say, this cracked me up. I'm authentically myself.
Mm.
Okay. I don't know what that means, but I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah.
Define success. I guess um wait, okay, hold on. Here, this is what I think it is. Um, you want to be 1% better than you were yesterday, that kind of theme. You want to make the world a better place than it was tomorrow. Um, when I one of the things, this goes back to values my mom and dad taught me. Whenever you borrow something from somebody, you return it in a better condition than you got it. So that's, to me, I guess success. That's what life is like too. You want to leave the world a better place than when you arrived. Right. So can I make the world a better place? Is there more peace? Is there more joy? Are more people thriving? It just, yeah, that's what I think what to be. Leave the world a better place than when you arrived.
Well, and I think that just with you closing out with that statement, um, it mirrors what your actions are doing with what you're doing right now with your fractional CTO
Yeah.
work, right?
Mhm.
You said you want to leave the world a better place. And also you said you only want to work with businesses that have great missions that are working on leaving the world a better place and working on leaving people, in a better place than where they found themselves.
Yeah, this is like a therapy session. I mean, do I
Yeah.
have to pay you? I mean,
We're
it's like
we're
all
gonna
this
have a yeah,
self-discovery right
we're
now,
on the couch. No,
Yeah.
we'll end there before we get too deep.
I know, right?
Yeah, no, thanks again for joining on the Engineered Success podcast. It's been amazing having you on. I know I had a ton of takeaways, and then there's gonna be a lot of value for others that they pull out of this as well. So thank you again, Brent, for being on.
Well, I hope so. And I just want to thank you again. It's been a lot of fun for me. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, whether, you can find me on LinkedIn. If you just want a tip, you want a connection, I'm not looking for you to work for you, but I'm just saying, I just want to help people.
Yeah.
That's where it comes
And
from.
we'll put your contact information in the description of the video as well, so people
Okay.
can reach out to you that way.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks
Perfect.
a lot, Steve.
Yep. Thanks.
Take care.